Hey, what's up guys? Dr. D here with another video on music production. Today we're going to be looking at drum racks in Ableton Live. So let's get down to business. Alright, so I've got Ableton Live open here, and the drum rack is the instrument device that you're going to be using when you create drums and sequencing drums. Let's start with the most basic thing that you might do with a drum rack. So when you're under the drums category here in the browser on the left side of Ableton, there are many different libraries of drum samples. So when you click through here, you can audition these one at a time. Basically listen to the collection of drum sounds. And once you find one that you like, you can double click or you can drag it onto a MIDI track. And then you will have all of these instruments ready to go inside of your drum rack here. Okay, cool. So let's get that. There we go. You can hear all that craziness. So there's a lot of different drum racks. When you're looking at a default drum rack that opens, there's a lot of stuff going on here. These have been pre-built for you. So let's strip it down and let's start with a fresh drum rack. Okay. So a blank drum rack, you're going to see a series of pads, and these are essentially MIDI notes. Okay. So on your MIDI keyboard, you can see the little yellow lights popping up down here. Those are the keys of my keyboard that I'm pressing. Okay, so you kind of figure out which one's C, low C, middle C, whatever you're looking for. Those are going to correspond to those keys. All right, so on the left side of the drum rack, there's these buttons right here, these little circles here. One is the chain list, which will display a list of all the different samples that you have placed on each of these. And then there is the device view, which will show you like a little view of the device if you have like effects, audio effects devices on there, or you want to edit the sample. So let's get to that. So when you're building your own drum rack, you can essentially go to the sample library here and you will find many samples. We want to narrow it down. So first of all, I'm going to look for a kick drum. I'm going to type in kick, and I'm going to see and hear a big collection of all the kick drum samples. So when I find a kick drum that I like, I can drag this sample and place it onto the appropriate MIDI note that I want it to be assigned to. All right, so I drag that kick drum onto the C1, and what I see is the device view, which shows me kind of like a sample editor. There's a lot of parameters here. I won't go into detail, but the idea is you can find a kick drum, you can find your snare drum sound, kind of custom build your own drum kit here. So I might place that on D1, which is my D key on my keyboard, so I'm keeping track. Kick drum, snare drum, and then maybe some hi-hats. Most of the hi-hats are under hi-hat. So anywho, you can find some hi-hat sounds, maybe place those on the E key, and I can start tracking my drums. Okay, so that's kind of the basic rundown of the drum rack. I'm going to get into a little bit more detail, some more advanced ways of using the drum rack. I'm going to go ahead and start from scratch here. Grab a fresh drum rack, clear out that Finder, grab a drum rack, drop it on my MIDI track there, and I'm looking at my blank drum rack. Now, one of the things you might do if you are a little bit more detail oriented about making your drum sounds is sculpting your own drum sounds by layering different drum sounds. So if I'm building a kick drum, I might build a kick drum that has like some bright beater, that has some low end low frequency definition, and then maybe some resonance, kind of like tonal stuff that's in the mid frequencies that echoes or delays, or has some sort of room characteristic to it. So I'm thinking of the components of each of these drum sounds. I can do the same thing with snare, where I might have like a click of the stick, I might have the bright sizzle of the snare, maybe some of the ringing of the drum, almost like a snare drum top microphone would give you, where you're hearing like the tonal characteristic of the snare drum. Hi-hats, I might look for a little click kind of sound, and maybe a maybe a bright tss, and just kind of like combine these sounds. So the way that we're going to do that is with nested instrument racks within the drum rack. Okay, so I've got my drum rack going right here. I'm going to go back to the instruments category, and I have the instrument rack. Okay, so this is going to allow me to rack several samples together and then mix them and do effects returns as well, all within the drum rack. So this is kind of the pro way of doing it. So I'm going to grab the instrument rack. I'm going to drop one on C1, which is my usually my kick drum. I'm going to grab another one and drop it onto D1, which I'll use as my snare, and then I'll drop another one on E1 for my hi-hat. Okay, so I drop the instrument racks inside of the pads of the drum rack. The next thing I'm going to do is rename each of these so I know what they are. Command R on a Mac, I can just select the instrument rack that's sitting there in the drum rack. Command R, I can call this kick. I can go to the next one, Command R, I'm going to call that snare. And then Command R on the next one to call that hi-hat. Maybe hi-hat closed or something. So, I'll probably have an open hi-hat as well as a closed hi-hat eventually. Okay, sweet. So when I click on these different instrument racks, there you can see that there's another device. In Ableton, the device chain is kind of like these little rack-mounted squares that you kind of see visually down here in the device view. What I want to do is show the chain list view of my drum rack. Okay, so that's those three little lines right there, that little button. And I have a chain list of the different instrument racks within my drum rack. Cool. Now over here in my instrument rack, each of these instrument racks is going to be a different one as I click through here. But I have this little portion that says drop an instrument or sample here. Perfect. So I'm going to start with kicks. First, I'm going to look for a kick sample that's got some beater, some bright attack to it. Okay, let's go with that. Keep it quick. So there's kind of a distant, bright beater sound. I'm going to select my kick track there, my kick instrument rack in the chain list of the drum rack. I'm going to drag that and place that where it says drop an instrument or sample here. Boom. Okay, so at this point, I'm looking at my instrument rack in the device view of the instrument rack. This is the MIDI editor, or not the MIDI editor. This is the sample editor right here. I'm going to show my chain list view on the instrument rack. Okay, so it's drum rack with an instrument rack within it, nested inside of it. And then I have the view of the device, the sample view. I can show or hide, as well as the chain list within the instrument rack. So this is a chain list of all the samples that I'm going to layer. So I've got my beater. I'm going to look for, oh, there's a beater. I like that beater better. Okay, I'm going for a super bright, clicky beater. And then I want something low. How about that 70s, kick 70s? All right, that's pretty low. And then something more like resonant room sounds. Maybe that kick distance is kind of a nice one. All right, so at this point, when I hit my C1, I'm going to hear all three of those kick samples fired off simultaneously. Okay, so the power of the instrument rack is the power of the instrument rack nested within the drum rack is I can mix together these three drum samples. Okay, so they're all really loud. Basically, I just layered three kick drums on top of each other. Now the kick drum is 3 times as loud as it was. So a good idea is to drop each of these maybe by like 3 or 4 dB, because what happens down the road is all of a sudden your drum rack is putting out so much output. Every time you hit the kick drum, you're like peaking almost. You're at unity gain already. You kind of want to be well under unity gain on your master output. So you don't want to have too much power pumping out of your drum rack track, because then every other instrument track needs to be super loud on your mix, and then it's just a loud fest. Okay, so I can solo each of these and listen to each of these characteristics. Okay, maybe I want a little bit less of the bright, a little bit more of the low, a little bit more room characteristic. All right, cool. So I can balance these out with the volume. I can also pan these. I'm not going to pan my kick drum because I don't ever do that. And you can solo these individually. And then I continue through my snare and my hi-hat, kind of shaping each of these. But one of the things I like to do within the device view of each of these samples is double check my phasing. All right, when a kick drum and when you have multiple kick drum samples layered, you want to make sure that all of them are kind of going positive waveform wise. So I can look down here and zoom into each of these. Okay, that one's going positive, it looks good. I can go in here, look at this one, zoom way in, that one's going positive as well. Most of these usually go positive. Ooh, this one isn't. This one's kind of teetering down negative before it rips up positive. So I'm going to bring the starting point of this specific kick sample a little bit tighter in there and make sure that there's no phasing or any weirdness. Like I was saying earlier, you can change the attack, decay, sustain. So if you have a drum sound that's got like some room ring and that's too much, I can kind of trim the back end of that sample so it doesn't have as much. And I can change the release, sustain. I can tighten up sounds like that. And you can also pitch them up and use filters and all kinds of cool stuff. So anyway, that is the each of the sample views of each of these kick samples that you can edit the actual sample. All right, cool. So another really awesome thing about the drum rack in the nested instrument rack drum thing is you can use effects, sends and returns within the drum rack. So reverb, delay, distortion, saturation, whatever things you want to do here, you can have these within the drum rack. So it's almost like doing post-production drum work inside of the drum rack, and then you can save this drum rack and use it again and again. So as you build it. So let's do that. All right. So on the left side of the drum rack, you notice when you have the chain list active or shown, I have I-O, S, and R. This is the ins and outs. It's going to show basically ins and outs of each of the drum sounds, which are instrument racks nested inside the drum rack. Then I have the the sends and the returns that I can show. Okay, so this is kind of like when you're doing mixing. You send signal, like a voice, you have a vocal track, and you send the signal of the voice into another track that has reverb on it, a track that's just basically a reverb plugin. So that's how you mix reverb. You don't put reverb on top of the voice because it makes it muddy and hard to hear and it loses clarity. So what you do is you have your original raw, clean vocal track, and then you send it to another track that has just reverb, and then you mix in that reverb parallel with it. So that's kind of what's going on within the drum rack with your drum sounds. Okay, so to do this, I need to look for a reverb. We'll demonstrate it with reverb. So I'm into my audio effects. I'm looking for a reverb with an R. I'm going to just grab the generic reverb here. And you see over here on your drum rack, I have shown the ins and outs, the sends, the returns, and there's a portion of the box that says drop audio effects here. Boom. That's where I want to drop my reverb. Okay. Once I do that, I have a reverb device sitting down here. And if I look up, it's called A. It's, in Ableton, they call each of the sends, and they label them A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or whatever. So in the chain list, I see I have a send category as well. And this is how I can send a portion of the kick drum to the verb and add reverb. Now I have reverb on my kick drum. Not that I would use that much reverb, but I might. You never know. Okay, so I could do this with all kinds of other sounds. I could go with reverb. I could go with maybe some distortion. I think it's called distortion in here. Maybe it's called overdrive. Yeah, it is. So I grab the overdrive and I drop that down here in one of my effects boxes here. And now I have another send, a send B, and the send B is the distortion. So if I want a little bite to my kick drum, a little bit of overdrive distortion there and some reverb, I can do that. Now you see what I mean? I'm already peaking my master fader, so that means I need to turn down basically all of my drum sounds. I can do that individually if I select and go individually from each of my instrument rack drum sounds. I can turn these all down right here, but another way of doing it is on the drum rack chain list. There's a volume as well, which basically turns down all the samples. You don't have to mess with the mix at all. So I just get that down a lot more. I don't need to have my kick drum by itself peaking my master fader. Okay, so that is using effects, sends, and returns within the drum rack. So what I would do is I would continue essentially building out my drum kit. I go to snares, I type in a snare, and I look for samples, and I'd be going for a snare sound that has some like click to it. Maybe a bright one. Okay, that's a bright clicky one. I kind of like that. Make sure I'm selected on my snare instrument rack. Drop that one in there. Maybe drop it down like 4 dB because it's going to be loud if I don't when I layer it. So I've got a bright one. This is kind of a nice deep tonal snare quality. Drop that one in there. And then maybe a click. I need some kind of clicking sound. Click, click, click. Or a stick. Maybe I'll look for a stick. There we go. Okay, that's like a click. It's just like a wood stick sound, but it might have a nice attack quality to my snare. Okay, so when I throw those in there, I'm gonna drop them all down about 4 dB of volume, and now I can kind of like go between that sound, okay. And shape my snare drum however I want it. And then I can come back over here on my snare drum. I can have some verb. Get some verb going on my snare. Maybe a little bit of crunch. Make it a little bit more bitey. Oh yeah, gotta keep them separated. Okay, so another thing I can do real quick before we're done here is I can save my drum rack and reuse it later, recall it. So under here I've got user library, and I've got Dave's custom sounds. I've got some drums in here, different drums that I've used. I can take this drum rack, I can drag and drop this onto my folder, and then later when I want to pull up a session and do a quick little, production of drums, I can kind of grab one of my already created drum setups and reuse that. Tweak it a little bit, resave it, whatever. But yeah, so it's a great way of saving time when you have already built a bunch of these drum racks. Okay, cool. So hope you learned something. Subscribe, keep up with the videos, and we'll see you on another video. Cheers. Peace.